Can you hear us? Hello, welcome everyone. This is the BC Alliance for Healthy Living webinar, Come As You Are, Reconnecting Disengaged Youth with Physical Activity. My name is Rita Koutsadimos, and I'm the Executive Director of the BC Alliance for Healthy Living, and we are so pleased that you are joining us. We're here today to talk about engaging youth in physical activity, and in particular, we're focusing in on youth who've experienced barriers or may otherwise be feeling marginalized. We have an interesting program lined up for you, which I'll tell you about shortly, but before we get rolling, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. If you're having trouble hearing, try turning up the volume on your phone or computer, and we really want to get your input today. So we'll be asking you to use the control panel on the right-hand corner of your screen. Type in your questions for our speakers as you think of them. We'll be having a question period after each speaker and a final round at the end of the two presentations, pardon me. We'll also want you to participate in some polls. So we'll give you a heads up that the poll is coming, and you'll see a blue screen that has multiple choice questions. Just respond to the polls. You'll have a few seconds to do so, and then we'll publish the results for everyone to see. The polls provide us, our panelists, and you with instant feedback. Again, we really want to hear those questions and comments, so just submit them by typing them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. And please indicate if there's someone in particular you're addressing it to. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for, and if we miss any of them, we'll send out a post-event email with missed Q&As. So now let me tell you about our program. Everyone knows that regular physical activity is good for you. We know it when we do it because it feels good, or at least it always feels good afterwards. And we know it because there are literally reams of research studies and papers to back this up. But when kids transition into their teens, we notice that their participation starts to wane. This dropout effect can be even more pronounced among youth that are already facing barriers or are marginalized because of race, gender or sexual identity, because of family income, class, physical ability or mental health, or any other number of factors that lead them to feel as though they're not included. And that is, in fact, if they haven't been turned off physical activities even earlier. So this makes this group very hard to reach for people that are trying to engage youth in physical activities, like many of you probably are. And this is why this group was identified as a priority in the provincial physical activity strategy. For those of you that aren't aware, BC's physical activity strategy is a fantastic initiative established by the Ministry of Health, but with loads of input and collaboration from many leading thinkers and NGOs in physical activity. BC Alliance for Healthy Living provides oversight and support for the programs that are targeted to increase activity in children and youth, which includes two youth-oriented programs that we're going to hear about today. So, are we going to do this poll? Okay. But before we hear from our first speaker, let's start with a poll and find out about you. So which of these statements best describes your interest in the webinar today? I work directly with youth or on youth issues. I'm interested or work in physical activity. I'm interested or work in health promotion. I'm interested or work to reach disadvantaged groups. None of the above, but this topic just interests me. So choose one that best applies for you today. Okay, well, interesting. We've got a pretty even split, but with the majority of people working in health promotion. That's great. Well, I hope you'll find this interesting then. So our first speaker, Shauna Lawson, is with Via Sport. She's going to speak about their focus group research and what youth say themselves about these issues. as well as what advice we can take from youth workers that have been especially successful in creating inclusive spaces that attract more youth, including those youth who have felt excluded in the past. Our second speaker, Samantha Hartley-Foles from the YMCA, will tell us about their MindFit program, which is targeted to youth between 13 and 19 and who are experiencing mild to moderate depression. So we'll start with Shauna. It's my pleasure to introduce Shauna Lawson. She is the Manager of Research and Social Innovation with Via Sport. She holds a master's degree in kinesiology from UBC, and she is the lead for Via Sport's Youth Inclusion Project. Over to you, Shauna.
Thanks, Rita. Good morning, everyone. I have to say I'm so excited to be on the call and need to begin by thanking the Alliance for the invitation. I think I'm a bit of a liability because I could talk about this project for hours. I won't do that, but it's really thanks to their support and to the support of the Ministry of Health and the Tourism, Arts and Culture that we've been able to do this work. I also want to thank all of you who've joined the call. It's really great to know that there's a bunch of folks out there who care about this issue as much as we do. I wish I could see you all, but the webinar will have to do. So my plan is to spend the next 15 minutes or so speaking about our key learnings from the youth inclusion training we've been developing as part of the physical activity strategy. And I'll try to do it in a way that informs your work, but also in a way that might leave you wanting more. So there's a ton of content that I couldn't include within these 15 minutes. So my hope is that you might reach out through my email that's listed there or on Twitter to have a follow-up conversation. So I've titled this presentation Getting to Maybe, which is after my favorite social innovation book by Frances Wesley, but also because it speaks to the daunting but also hopeful nature of this work. So increasing youth participation in sport and physical activity and recreation is a huge, complicated, messy, and wicked problem, especially for youth who face additional barriers to participation. Next slide, Brenda. So a wicked problem is defined as one that's impossible or difficult to solve for a number of reasons, including, we have incomplete or competing knowledge, many people and opinions are involved, there's a large economic burden to solve it, but it's also very connected and interrelated to other problems. So while we know that youth from marginalized populations participate at lower rates than their peers, we also know that this problem doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it's wrapped up with issues of poverty, with issues of discrimination, social inequality, even technology. And so it requires multiple people and organizations and multiple solutions. So at Via Sport, we definitely think it's a problem worth solving, and we're working alongside a lot of partners, including the YMCA, BCRPA, and the Alliance to get there. Next slide. So we have a vision at Via Sport that all British Columbians thrive via sport. So when we say all, we actually truly mean all. So a lot of our focus is on making sure that regardless of your age, your background, your identity, there's a place for you in sport in our province. But also when we say sport, we really mean sport in the broadest sense, so as play. So you'll hear me use physical activity, recreation, and sport sort of interchangeably, and we think there's more in common between those three things than there are differences. So my first question to you all, just trying to understand sort of who's on the call, is how are you working to solve this wicked problem of engaging youth at the margins in physical activity, recreation, or sport? So I had to give 5 options. I know there's more, but are you developing or overseeing programs for youth? Do you research issues related to this problem? Do you support others to solve this problem? Or are you creating overarching policies or strategies related? Okay, cool. So it looks like there's actually quite a few people working directly with youth, which or sort of looking at programs for youth. So that's really great to know. So at Via Sport, we would sort of sit in those bottom 4. So our primary responsibility is to manage the government's investment in sport, and we do that by supporting leaders to deliver safe, inclusive, and high-quality sport experiences for British Columbians. So next slide, Brenda. So the youth inclusion training that we're working on under the physical activity strategy is just one piece of this work, in that we're attempting to build safe, welcoming, and inclusive environments for youth at the margins by providing Inclusion 101 training to recreation staff and coaches. And our hope is that this training sort of acts as a jumping off point to pique people's curiosity to want to do more. So we know there's population-specific training by Canucks Autism Network. I know that iSpark's developing some as part of this strategy. And we see this training as a way to get people to be curious and want to do that training, not as a replacement to it. And we've taken a grounded, and I would argue quite a unique approach to this project. So next slide, Brenda, thanks. But it would be dishonest for me to say that this was our intention, when we started. It really grew out of necessity. But it also grew out of an acknowledgement that there were so many things that we didn't know and couldn't know, but really needed to find out in order to develop this training and do this work responsibly. And so I had the privilege of spending most of 2017 really seeking to understand how marginalized youth experience sport in BC, or marginalization, experience exclusion, and identify potential solutions. So I really did 3 core activities that we did as an organization. The first thing that we didn't know is what kind of training was needed, where were the gaps and the strengths. And so we partnered with BCRPA to deliver 2 surveys to over 500 recreation staff to really understand, what they needed to know, but also how they wanted to learn. The second thing is that we really didn't know what works on the ground. And so because we don't deliver programming to youth, we didn't know those sort of recommended best practices, but we knew that there were people out there who were doing an excellent job making youth feel included every day. And so we partnered with 22 community organizations and ran focus groups, interviews, and observations with folks that we called inclusion experts to learn what worked not only in theory, but also in practice. And then the third activity was something related to that which we couldn't know. And that was, we didn't feel right developing this training about what youth wanted or how they wanted to be treated without actually talking to youth. And so we partnered with a youth facilitator, hired a youth representative, and connected with many service organizations to run 14 focus groups with nearly 250 youth across the province. I can say that was incredibly life-changing work. And it was during that phase that I met Miko, and she helped us learn our next big lesson. So next slide, Brenda. So this is Miko. She's given me permission to share her story, and she has a really complex but also intersectional identity and came from what she describes as a crappy home life. She used more explicit language than that, but for her, sport was her only safe space. It was where she felt safe and she felt like she could be herself, and so she really poured herself into it. She was more than participating, she was sort of the success story that we look for in sport. Except for that wasn't enough for her. So Miko had 10 concussions in 1 year because she was a goalkeeper in soccer and her coach simply wouldn't let her rest. And so she could no longer play because of health reasons. And at that point, she really lost everything. She lost that place where she felt like she could belong, and her very recreational drug use turned into a full-blown heroin addiction, and she was living on the streets. And so while Miko's story is extreme, I don't know that that's that unique, and I'm proud to say that, Miko is now clean, she's thriving, we hired her, she traveled around the province with us as a youth representative, but she taught us this incredible lesson that participation is maybe not a high enough bar. So meaningful inclusion has to be the target, but also the stakes are incredibly high, so it needs to be meaningful experience after meaningful experience. But the good news is that we learned a lot about what we can do to sort of create those conditions. So next slide. So one of the first findings is related to getting youth in the door in the first place. And perhaps not surprising to people, the key learning here is that there are big systematic barriers that simply have to be addressed in order to increase participation and in order for these youth to even walk in the door. And so I'll use Eastside Boxing. There's a photo that I took on the right there when we were doing some observations. Because they really epitomized a lot of these practices that we saw come up in these 22 organizations over and over again. So firstly, they had really resilient and creative staff who thought outside the box to reduce these barriers. So they had a staff of 3, but did really incredible things to meet the needs of youth in their community. They set aside core budget and fundraise to deliver programming at no cost to participants. So they serve 30 to 40 kids on the downtown east side at no cost 5 days a week. It's phenomenal. And many of their programs, Eastside Boxing's programs, but also the other programs we witnessed, included transit passes within their core operating budget. And this was something that, we don't see in sport and recreation that often. I know City of Vancouver is doing some initiatives with TransLink, but leaders often said, oh man, without transit passes, we would lose most of our participants. So I think that's something that we could do rather easily. And the third and most important strategy here was around partnerships. And so Eastside Boxing, for example, has a partnership with ASICS, with Lululemon. They have a nutritionist that comes in each day and provides food through a partnership with Good Food for All. They have a doctor embedded on site, a youth worker, and this was a staff of 3 with very limited resources. So the lesson here was that there's a ton of organizations out there who want to help. We just need to ask. Next slide. So once youth are through the door, we learned so much from them about, from youth and from inclusion experts about what can be done to set the stage for inclusion or belonging. And the key lesson here was that who's running these programs, who is that face-to-face staff with these youth matters almost more than anything else. And I'll use the Red Fox Healthy Living Society as a bit of a case study here, as they again embodied many of these recommended practices we heard from youth and from inclusion experts. So Red Fox has incredibly charismatic leaders, if you have the privilege of meeting any. They're young, and they don't need to be taught how to connect with youth. They do it naturally. Part of it is because they're youth themselves, but this sort of it factor, this ability to connect, was something that we saw time and time again. Almost all of Red Fox staff are former participants, so they have an incredible mentorship model where they identify and train and then hire young leaders in leadership roles and as core staff. They gave up control often, so they let youth guide decision making, whether it's choosing the activity or grouping themselves, activities big and small. And then they preferred fun and flexibility over rigidity and structure, so they were able to go with the flow each day. Next slide, please. And finally, we learned so much, and this really came from youth, about what they were seeking in terms of, sort of at that interactional level or connection between, peer-to-peer, but also with the recreation leaders. And the primary learning here, I say that it felt like we just kept getting hit over the head with this one, is that a one-size-fits-all approach is simply not the way to go. And so here I'll use the City of Vancouver youth workers as an example. This is I had the privilege of attending their summer camp that they had over 80 youth from central Vancouver for 3 days. And I was able to watch a lot of their leaders sort of embody these practices. And so, we often joked about, it's not as though you put on your, okay, I'm working with an Indigenous boy between the ages of 12 to 20 hat. Guess what? That quote unquote boy identifies as two-spirit and has an invisible disability. You actually just need to get to know that person. And these staff did that incredibly well. And that also includes getting to know their and celebrating their strengths. So the youth workers here also did a really neat thing, which was they linked the activities that youth were really wanted to do with physical activity or sport activities. So at this camp, for example, they intermixed hiking in between art and sort of games. And this is really similar in the learning that we gleaned out of the After School Sports and Arts Initiative, if you're familiar. And then my second question to you is, we've learned so much about what youth want and just actually general life lessons from engaging youth. So what first step could you or would you take to incorporate youth voice in either your programming or decision making? And there's a few options here. I know there's many other. Cool. Okay, it looks like, partnering with existing organizations and connecting with the youth leader. Absolutely. So we actually did all of these practices in order to get a chance to talk to youth in our focus groups. I would stress that the second one, which is hiring somebody who knows what they're doing, I would recommend a great deal. So it's one thing to, sort of host. We did a lot through art to host that, but somebody who has experience sort of holding those conversations, especially when there's youth who might have experienced trauma, is a really important thing to do. Okay, so what's next? We'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Brenda. So the other thing that we recognized that we didn't know is how to turn all this mountain of data into workshop content. And so I'm proud to say we've hired Alden Habakon, who's an inclusion and diversity strategist, well-known internationally, as well as Trans Focus, who leads trans inclusion training around the province. So they're taking all this content and turning it into workshops. We're in the process of hiring 15 learning facilitators. So MOVE facilitator stands for Moving Others Through Voices of Experience. And these are folks who really are passionate about inclusion and can also speak to their own lived experience of feeling excluded or included. So we'll be holding pilots throughout the summer. We think around 100 learners, and then phase 1 of our provincial rollout will be complete by fall of 2018. I do want to take a moment to say we are still looking for facilitators, and so if you know anyone, especially outside the Lower Mainland, who might be interested in this kind of opportunity, please do connect and I can forward you the job posting. And I'll just close with the next slide by saying I think all of us have the responsibility to do whatever we can to make our programming, our workplaces, our communities safe, inclusive, and welcoming of everyone, but especially of youth who often feel like there's no space for them. And so while we're piloting this training in recreation and sport, we have a massive vision for where these youth stories and where this training content could go. So we know we have the issue of low participation in sport. It exists in recreation, but it doesn't end there. So my question to you would be, where are the touch points with other sectors, with education, with health? Who else might we bring in to solve this wicked problem together? And just the final slide, Brenda. So as I said, I hope this is, sort of the first conversation of many. So if you're hesitating to reach out, please do so. I've loved talking about this project, and there's much more that we learned that I couldn't include here. So I'll leave it at that, but please do get in touch.
Great. Thanks so much, Shauna. So fantastic to hear about the research you've done and how we have to move beyond remaining systemic barriers, which is really the first step in terms of opening up the door, but also really make sure that we've got those soft skills about hiring the right people and leading with compassion and meeting people as individuals. Such great stuff. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions shortly, but maybe we can start with a question for you, Shauna. Getting youth to participate in focus groups, let alone physical activity, can be a real challenge. How were you able to reach so many youth?
Thanks, Rita. Yeah, I think I was surprised myself. So our target initially was to speak to 50 youth, and as I said, we ended up talking to, I think, 233 in total. And it really was through, so we hired a woman, Kat Thorson, who is an amazing woman, highly recommend her. She has a lot of experience facilitating youth voice. So she does creative engagement, and she was a former art facilitator. And so, one of the things that she recommended is, none of us like to sit in a boring focus group. And so why would a youth who has a lot of other things going on want to make the time for that? And so we did a sort of exchange where she would run these really fun, dynamic art camps, essentially, where she would give them some drawing instruction. And that was a way that we could actually use art-based facilitation to draw out youth voice. So these weren't roundtable discussions where we were asking youth to share out loud. A lot of this was written data, and we used a lot of really creative techniques in order to reach them. So that was one thing that went a long way, is hiring that expert. She was also able to hold that space really well. And the other was through partnerships and reaching out. So actually the YMCA and Samantha, who's going to speak next, were incredibly helpful with connecting us to youth programs, existing youth programs. So we didn't want to put a poster up that said, are you a marginalized youth between these ages, rip off a tab. So finding existing programs and existing spaces where youth who face barriers are already there. So a lot of these were employment-based programs, and then offering them something in return was something that we had a lot of success with.
Great. And I have a question from, I believe it's Louisa Kudo, who wants to know, where in BC are the 2018 programs going to be running?
Yeah, great question, Louisa. So to be determined would be the real answer. So we've hired about 50% of our facilitators. Our hope is that They deliver training within municipal recreation associations, but we're really keen to get it out more broadly. And so right now we've got someone hired, a few people in the Lower Mainland, a few Fraser Valley, one in the Columbia Basin, the Okanagan, and on the island. But if you're interested, please do connect because, yeah, we're looking for phenomenal people. And if we can't find them in your community, we're happy to send somebody there as well.
Great. And one more question here, Shauna. Some of the findings don't seem to mesh up with the way organized sport currently operates. How do you see making this research relevant to sport organizations?
It's a phenomenal question. Yeah, so it was really interesting in that, you know, when we walked in, we didn't really ask youth questions about sport. We actually asked them about, you know, have your experiences been feeling included and feeling excluded? We don't care actually where it's been, but a lot of the youth shared really, to be honest, quite heart-wrenching stories about sport being that site of exclusion for them. So for example, you know, one youth talked about trying out for the volleyball team, took a lot of guts to get there. He didn't have the right shoes. It was his only pair of shoes. The coach made a comment and he literally never returned to the gym again. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of work that we need to do in sport. There's also a lot of phenomenal people that are doing this kind of work. And so I think equipping sport leaders with this kind of information and these tools, our hope is that it'll go a long way in, you know, just solving those interactional things that are a huge deal to youth, but can be quite minor to adjust in our own behavior.
Great. Thank you, Shauna. And I think we have time for one last question from Carrie. Can Shauna say again what MOVE facilitators, M-O-V-E facilitator stands for? And was this created as part of the initiative or pre-existing?
Yeah, so it was. So we wanted to, so MOVE stands for Moving Others Through Voices of Experience. And what we wanted to highlight is no one is an expert in inclusion. People are experts in their own lived experience, but there's a lot that we can all learn around, you know, the lived experience of others. And so we wanted to draw in people who were really passionate about including others, whether they had experience doing so or expertise doing so. And so this was created as part of this initiative because we really wanted to draw in those folks who were so passionate about inclusion that I know are in communities across BC.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Shauna. That's
thank
fantastic.
You.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Samantha Hartley-Foles, and Sam is the Manager of Provincial Initiatives at the YMCA. She's worked in the nonprofit sector for over 17 years in a variety of roles, including program management and development, grants, communications, and policy, including a decade with the BC Alliance for Healthy Living. And now she's working with the MindFit and Why Mind mental wellness programs to support their expansion across BC. So over to you, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Hi there. Just taking you guys off of mute and off of speakerphone. Thanks, Rita, for the introduction, and always a pleasure to work with BCAHL, and really excited to talk about the YMCA's MindFit program this morning. So MindFit is, great, there's the agenda, was formerly known as Jump Step for Teens. And I'm going to give you just a brief overview of why we felt there was a need for the program, how we developed the program and some of the partnerships that were included, and then some of the challenges that we found and a lot of opportunities that we found in rolling out the program over the last year and a half. And I have to say a big thank you to the BC Alliance for Healthy Living and the Ministry of Health in terms of the funding through the physical activity strategy for this program. Started as a pilot, and it's allowing us to do more expansion as we go along. So again, the YMCA is really excited about the program. Next slide, Brenda. So what is the problem, and why did we bring MindFit into being? So teens with symptoms of mood disorders are significantly less likely to participate in physical activity as compared to their peers. And so we wanted to reach out to those youth seeing that they were a bit vulnerable, and say to them, how can we bring you in? We have the YMCA has another mental wellness program, our mindfulness groups, and that's our YMind program. And so we had been having some traction in terms of reaching teens and young adults through our mindfulness program, and which is targeted more at anxiety. And we really wanted to see how physical activity as an intervention could work to support teens with depressive symptoms, and really quite early on. So these are prevention and early intervention programs that provide skills and coping mechanisms for teens and youth before they get to that moderate to severe point where they really need clinical help. So students who reported a mental or emotional health condition were less likely to report exercising and participation in organized sports. We really, you can see the stats dropping off on that, 41% versus 60%. And 13% of youth who had experienced severe stress in the past month had not exercised in the past week, compared to 7% who did not report being stressed. And we know that physical activity can be as effective as medication in terms of helping with mood disorders, low mood specifically, and especially on that early part of the scale. Physical activity, the evidence is very strong in terms of showing that. So we really wanted to develop a program that responded to that. Next slide, Brenda. So we came up with MindFit, which is a targeted approach to reaching and supporting teens aged 13 to 19 years with symptoms of mild to moderate depression and or anxiety. Often depression and anxiety, especially on those low end, coexist. And so we wanted to be as open and inclusive to teens who were willing to come to the Y and talk to us about what they were doing and use physical activity as an intervention. We wanted to be as open as we can with them. So next slide. So to engage hard-to-reach teens in increasing their physical activities through a group-based intervention, and that low to no barrier is the key. As Shauna mentioned, if youth come in through our doors, whether it's the Y or a sport team or anywhere that they find themselves, we want to make sure that we're bringing them in, not turning them away. So the MindFit program is no cost, no referral in most cases, and it's a community-based program. So teens that might feel uncomfortable saying to friends, oh yeah, I have a counseling appointment, or I'm going off to the hospital to get some help. I'm going off to the Y to go to a program is just kind of an easy way. It's an easy step for them to take. And we really feel at the YMCA that we create a safe space where teens can socially connect with one another. And it's that non-stigmatizing environment that really helps them. And then bringing them together in a group-based intervention helps deal with, even if we didn't have the mental health clinician in the room, which we do, bringing together a group of 10 to 12 teens who feel like they're the only person in their grade or their school who's feeling that way, and letting them talk to one another and see that there's other people like them. There's just such strength in that, and we certainly found that. So our intent is to build education and awareness to let them know what symptoms and how it feel like those symptoms of anxiety and depression feel in their bodies, and talk about it in a really practical way, and teaching them healthy coping strategies that include physical activity. So next slide, Brenda, thanks. So MindFit is a closed group of 10 to 12 teens. It runs for currently at 10 weeks, which is a little bit long in terms of a program to keep the teens connected. So we may reduce it to 8 weeks to fit the school year better. But it brings in those 10 to 12 teens, and that they follow the same path for the weeks of the program together. So it's not a drop-in program where you see faces come in and out. We really ask for the teens to commit for the full period of the program, to get used to one another, to develop that sense of safety and trust with with the other teens and with the staff. We generally have one Y staff if it's in a Y location, who's a physical activity specialist, and then mental health support people from the community. And I'll talk about those partnerships in just a second. It's a 2-hour program. So there's a 1-hour group mental wellness visit that looks at goal setting, looks at setting up strategies, setting how to use physical activity and goal setting in terms to meet their overcome some of the mental health challenges, and then 1 hour of trying different physical activities. And those physical activities are somewhat determined by how much space we have and also the interest of the teens. So one day they may go for a walk around the community. One day they may try, we had one group that wanted to try rock climbing, so we took them on an outing to a rock climbing gym. Can look like yoga, can look like some basic physical literacy and movement, depending on the levels and the interest of the teens in the group. And with that group of 10 to 12, we can tailor it a bit. So we provide the education, support, and resources so that the teens can better understand their mental health and use physical activity as a healthy coping mechanism. As we know, otherwise, sometimes teens turn to some mechanisms that are a little bit less healthy. Next slide. So the MindFit program was adapted from the Jump Step adult program that was developed by the Mood Disorder Association of BC. And they worked with the Y to and had their psychiatrists help the Y to tailor and tweak the program so that it fit a teen population. We also used McCurry Centre Society's Youth Research Academy to ensure that the program was youth informed. So dialing, once we had a draft, dialing it back into the academy, hearing from them, and also, of course, the Y's experience with working with youth. The first pilot cycle ran last March, from March to June of 2017, and the pre and post assessments showed a small increase in physical activity levels for the majority of participants. And given that they started with quite low physical activity levels, we were really pleased with that increase. It also showed a general sense of connection and improved well-being during the course of the MindFit program, and that's really what we were finding in terms of anecdotally from the teens, that a lot of what they were finding was that sense of connection, that sense of not being alone, and that they could see how physical activity could become a part of a healthier and happier life for them. Next slide. So, and the other thing that MindFit has been great for is in terms of increasing the YMCA's partnerships across BC. And that includes partnerships between YMCA associations. So when we started the program, it was at our Y of Greater Vancouver Langara location. And that was creating different kinds of partnerships and improving on our partnerships just within that one pilot. We reached out to school districts, counselors, teachers, different types of folks who were working with teens to say, we were running this pilot. It was a new program. We were really looking for teens on that mild to moderate end of the spectrum. And please, send the teens that would be appropriate our way. So I think we had a list of about 20 to 30 groups that we were connected with just in terms of that recruitment piece. And then as we found there was good results from the program, we went to talk to the YMCA, YWCA on Vancouver Island and the Y of Northern BC to say, would you guys be interested in this program? If we train you up, will you give it a try? And they did, and really, really liked the program, really liked what it offered the teens in their area, and are continuing to deliver it. And then we were lucky to get a bit of additional funding to expand the program further through the BC Alliance for Healthy Living and the Ministry of Health, and that allowed us to train our Kamloops and Kelowna YMCAs to deliver the program. And then in turn, as they're getting comfortable with the program, and they've all now are in the process of delivering or have delivered the program, they are in turn going to expand to to partnership sites beyond their bricks and mortar Ys to get the program expanded further. And they are already in discussions to do that for fall, winter of this year. So really excited to see how those partnerships continue to grow. We've also, in terms of helping us to get that mental health clinician piece, as of course, it's not always, we have some of those skill sets at the YMCA, but our folks were pretty stretched. So we've partnered with health authorities, both Vancouver Coastal Health and now Fraser Health, to help us find that clinician piece. We've worked with Encompass, which is a nonprofit organization in Langley, to help deliver the program, and School District 61 in Souk Langford has been the partnership to develop that, not just to recruit the participants, but also that their district level counselor is providing that mental wellness visit for the teens. And those are all, it just shows how high of an interest there is in this type of program, the need that's out there for youth with mild to moderate depressive symptoms, and just how many people want to help. YMCA is working to build capacity where we train so that there's sustainability and increase our reach through that partnership model. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the MindFit uses partnerships as a key element of our promotion of the program. You know, as I've mentioned already, we connect with secondary schools, school districts, on all those folks to find the kids that are the right fit for the program and send them our way. Teens that are experiencing low mood, anxiety, they're not the first to put their hand up and want to go join a program. So it's having those trusted connections and facilitators to get them through our doors that really make a huge difference in terms of getting the kids through the doors. And then it's up to us, once they get there, to ensure that they feel welcomed. We have a number of physical activity specialists at the Y, and always ensure that the folks who are guiding the MindFit program are those people with the it factor that Shauna mentioned, that, it's really critical. We provide a marketing toolkit for all of our Ys and partners so that it's easy for them to just, get down to the work and spread the word about the program. Next slide. So really, all the Y mental health programs manage stress and worries and anxiety, and we're really about that early intervention, prevention side of things, enhancing coping skills and connectivity. And really, it's that reducing isolation and bringing people together, whether it's teens or youth, that we have found is kind of that secret sauce of the Y, that what we do is bring people together, and that sense of community and delivering this program in community is one of the success factors. Next slide. So that's really, I kind of wanted to keep it a bit short and sweet on the talking side. Hoping there's some questions out there from the group in terms of, where you see this type of programming or what it might look like in your communities.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Sam. And yeah, we'll just invite our audience to start sending us questions now. Again, just as a reminder, you've got that text box on the right-hand side of your screen, so you can open up the question area and type in your questions for Sam. But it's so fantastic to hear about how the Y is supporting mental wellness through physical activity, which we know is so important on the prevention and health promotion side of mental health. So fantastic work, and it's just great to hear about all the diverse partners that are all contributing to make this happen. Sam, how do you find your partners and get them on board?
I have to put that down. I actually don't. We have some fantastic staff at the Y who have developed these lists, developed these relationships with local schools. And it's really about that reaching out And so they're out there making the calls, going to make presentations at the schools, both to the parent advisories, or they'll head to the lunchtime meeting of counselors at a school to talk about the program and let them know. And it was really that first round beating the bushes that really got the teens in the door for that first round. And then also, of course, always, just reaching out to those we have relationships with through some of our other programs, both our youth leadership development, which Shauna mentioned, was helped out with the youth inclusion piece, using all of those relationships with health authorities or school districts, wherever they find to try and reach those guys.
Oh, that's great. That's so great that you're already embedded in the community and using those connections. So I have a question here from Dave, who wants to know if the YMCA is going to partner with Northern Health so northern rural communities can be supported.
Thanks, Dave, for asking. So we do have the program running in Prince George. It's on its second cycle. We'd like to expand beyond Prince George. We don't have a huge amount of funding, but we are looking for partnership opportunities in a couple smaller communities, and have had some early conversations with Northern Health about what that could look like, but definitely hoping to pursue that. And if Dave has a suggestion of a community that might have the capacity to help support the program that we could come in and train, love to talk to him after the fact. And my email and contact information are up on the screen.
Great. I have a question from Neil Arison, who says, Samantha, you mentioned there are challenges with the program, but I didn't hear too many. Are there any challenges then with MindFit, things that you want to do differently?
Yeah, well, I've mentioned just how hard we work in order to recruit those teens, and that they are the ones that are hard to get through the door. So when we're trying to run quite small groups of 10 to 12 participants, you'd think that they would just be, when we hear about all of things on the news and all of the issues with mental health, that they would just be beating down our door. And that's not quite accurate. It takes a lot of work to fill the spots and make sure that we have the right teens in the room. And so we're always, just continuing those conversations around that in order to make sure that our recruitment's full and that we're maximizing the opportunity in all the communities. The other issues with teens, of course, is retention and ensuring that they show up for the different sessions. So we do, if we find that we haven't seen a teen one of the weeks, then we will follow up with them and just check in and make sure that they're okay, and that how we can help them get back to the program. So it's a really it's a relationship-based and very hands-on program.
Well, fair enough. I have a question from Louisa and from Barb that are kind of similar, so I'm going to combine them. So they want to know, what would a community need to do to be able to run a MindFit program, and whether it's possible to run Y-Minds or MindFit in a community without an YMCA, and whether there's options for training.
Yes, absolutely. It is possible. We have a small amount of funding to expand MindFit beyond where we have Y communities. So kind of 1 to 2 additional communities beyond where we have our Y regions, and then they would train. So we actually have a program starting in, I believe, we're in discussion with the town of Chase. So our Kamloops Y will be training folks out there to deliver the program. With our mindfulness programs, again, we've got a little bit more scope, just more funding to be able to do that. They have less of an emphasis on physical activity, more of a focus on mindfulness and anxiety, but again, that skill building and coping mechanisms. And definitely will be expanding that program further over the next year, and all of our Ys and ourselves are in discussions with a number of communities to do that. So if they know whether or not, the one piece that's really helpful is ensuring that there is that mental health clinician capacity within whatever community you're in, and linking up to an organization that is able to support that. So we want to make sure that we're working with a community that has the support to carry the full program. But please do follow up with me and get in touch if that's of interest.
Oh, that's great. Yes, it would be fantastic to see this go even further. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that we're going to open up the Q questions and answers to both our panelists now. So please type in any additional questions you have for Sam or for Shauna, and again, it's on that right-hand side of the panel. I do have a question for Shauna. Shauna, can you tell us about how organizations can support inclusion at an organizational level? What you learned, what some of the successful organizations are doing organizationally?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. I think, one of the things, so most often the folks that we were talking to were that frontline, those frontline staff, and they often spoke about, some of the tension or frustrations for them around, needing to build connections with schools, or, a lot of the work that Sam is talking about is sort of reaching in and trying to recruit more youth, but simply don't have the time or the space to do so. So that is one way that organizations, freeing up their frontline staff where possible to allow them to, reach out and network to supporting organizations. But also, they spoke too about the tension sometimes around, bringing in, 40 youth into their recreation center or into their facility, and not having all of the staff see that as a positive thing. And so I think, if those folks who are in sort of decision-making positions can do what they can to train and educate all their staff that, youth at the margins are core customers, and they have a right to be in the space. I think, a lot of the advocacy work that those frontline staff are sort of trying to do up the chain, I think if I could plug for them, the easier that you could make it on for them, whether it's setting budget aside to reduce some of those barriers, or whether it's training your other staff, they really are sort of superheroes on the ground. And so I would say the easier you can make their lives, I would for sure advocate for that.
Well, that's great. Sam, I have another question for you. Is this program something that has been tried in other provinces? Do you know about that?
Rita, no, as far as I know, this particular program has not. The original adult program that it was based on was BC-based. And then we adapted the teen program. Now, that being said, right after this call, I'm having a chat with our Saskatchewan YMCA folks who are interested in this type of program. So there's definitely interest across the province, but this MindFit is specific to BC at this point.
Well, that's kind of cool. I mean, BC leads the way in health promotion yet again. I guess we have another question too for both of you. In terms of tailored activities, what are youth like saying that they like? Seeing any trends?
Yeah, I can pick up on this a little bit. So it was interesting. So a lot of the programs that we went into to speak to youth had nothing to do with physical activity and sport, but obviously it was a topic of conversation. And perhaps not surprisingly, youth really were looking for something with a cool factor. So I know we fear boxing because of the concussion risk, but seeing that many youth from Vancouver's downtown side in that space, a lot of that was based on sort of the gritty nature of the sport. These youth weren't getting hit in the head, but the facility was cool, the staff were really cool, and so we often heard from youth, they talked about wanting to do hip hop dancing. They talked about, wanting to do mountain biking or, even trail running. So some of those, non-traditional sports seem to be a real highlight for them. I wasn't surprised to hear Sam say that the youth in MindFit wanted to go rock climbing. So I think even if you can pair, a little bit of a cool factor with more traditional activities, so ultimate frisbee is an example that came up quite a bit. I think youth seem to be really interested in those types of activities.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, so we do find that some of the youth that have those depressive symptoms are also, they are a bit low energy. So making sure that we're being gradual in terms of not trying to put them straight into a gym situation, or ensuring that we're working with their physical activity level and working to bring that up, rather than, sending them off to go for a, half-hour run right off the bat. That it is working with the youth where they are, and really, as Sean has mentioned, asking them what it is that they would prefer to do. And we can't always provide all the options, but giving them choice is critical.
And maybe, Rita, if I could just add one more point, it reminds me of, Red Fox, and they do some really, they do some circus games and some, quite neat activities that require little equipment. And one of the key things that we observed is that their staff would try and fail alongside the youth. So the staff were able to demonstrate that, I can really suck at a pogo stick and still have a positive experience. And so also having staff sort of mirror that vulnerability was really helpful to get youth to try some new and sort of outside the box activities.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really great. And I love that, it doesn't have to be a big, fat, expensive sport either. I mean, something as simple as ultimate frisbee just requires a $15 frisbee. So that's great. Well, I just want to thank both of our panelists, Shauna and Sam. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us all today, and thanks so much for the work that you do. It's truly important, and I think that as time goes on, we'll get better at these things. So thank you so much. Also want to put out a thanks to the Ministry of Health for supporting the physical activity strategy, and it's just great to see these initiatives blossoming across the province. And thanks to all of you in the audience for your attention and thoughtfulness and your questions today. We're so glad that you could join us. And we'll be following up with a very short survey so that we can respond better, and it helps us to learn from these events what's working and where we can do better next time. So we hope you'll join us again and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everyone.